But now I'm delighted to say I'm joined by a special guest all the way from Brisbane in Australia. And some of you will have been reading about him and hearing about him today. So welcome, Stuart, from Brisbane in Australia. Thank you very much for joining us. And I should tell our viewers at such short notice as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Roddy. I'm happy to be here.
Good. Well, we'll have to ask about that boat behind you in a minute, but first maybe I could just tell us about the boat, and then I'll do a wee intro and actually all about you, if I may.
All right. Okay. That boat behind me is a ship that when I came to Australia when I was 14. I'm number 3 of 6 kids, migrant kids, and my dad used to be in Denny Shipyard in Dumbarton, and I went off to sea 2 years later, and this is the ship that I spent the first 4 years at sea. It was a passenger cargo ship that went from Melbourne and Geelong and Victoria up to the Central Pacific. And on the way back, it would bring phosphate. On the way up there, it would carry passengers, fuel, refrigerated cargo. It was a great ship, and it was built on the Clyde at Harland and Wolff. And it was a classic style of those years.
I suppose as Glaswegians, as fellow Glaswegians, it's in our DNA, shipping. It's something in the Clyde, there's something about it that's maybe why you are where you are. And if I could just give some background, Stuart, because it really is a fabulous biography. And if I miss anything, please forgive me. But you are, as I say, Glasgow born, you're now living in Australia. You'd be fair to call you an inventor, a designer, a multi-award winner, because for some of your designs on speed steel hull catamaran passenger car ferries, you've offered around. You're also the chair of the World Ferry Organization. I'm just making sure I don't miss anything here. Interferry, the World Ferry Safety Association, and you're also chair of the Sea Transport Corp, based in Brisbane and Singapore. And you're in the process at the moment of building 30 ferries for the Philippines, and you've done ships or designed ships and commissioned ships for about 46 different countries.
Yes,
have I missed out anything?
That's correct. Yeah. So I'm busy.
Well, absolutely.
Keeps me out of mischief.
Yeah, and of course you know our good friend of this show, Alf Baird, another good marine man. But so ferries are your game. And you've had a very successful career out of that.
I have, and it's interesting you say that, Roddy, because the best ship designers actually that I've come across have been ex-seafarers. There were actually Scandinavian seafarers, 3 of them, that I class as being the best ship designers in the world. And I'd like to say that one of them has passed away, unfortunately. And I think I'm in the top 3 at the moment, a Scotsman and 2 Scandinavians. But they were all, and we are all ex-seafarers, because we actually understand it. We understand the DNA of it. We understand what we want the ship to do. Naval architects come out of it with a degree, but they don't have to even go to sea on a ship. So that's not really in the DNA.
So you were brought up living on the Clyde in Dumbarton, and you left to go to Australia in the mid-60s?
The early 60s. My dad, who was a foreman shipwright at Denny's, and his dad before him was in Denny's. So, but he could see that the place was about to collapse. So he wheeked us all off to Australia. And at those times, the parents paid £10. They had to stay for 2 years, and the kids came for nothing. And of course, I was number 3 of 6, and number 3 of 6 is terrific because they can never remember your name. So it's a nice way to be. So
you bring Watch's name with you. Bring Watch's name.
That's right.
Bring him along.
That's right. But I was the first of the 6 kids to leave home. I went off to sea. I don't think anyone noticed. Actually, I disappeared to sea. So.
And but maybe that was your Clyde thing. Maybe because your shipbuilding background in genetics.
No, I can tell you it was in my DNA, because even before I left, for the 2 years before I left, I would sit down at Dumbarton Castle and I would watch these ships intently as they came down the Clyde and went back up the Clyde. and they were going to South America or India. And, I had my Allen books of ships, and I would score under the line where I saw those particular ships, and it was just fascinating. So that's what drew me in. It was in my DNA.
Yeah, and you're other great. You've never lost your love for Scotland, or and obviously, like so many, you don't lose your accent either. You're a proud Scotsman.
That's correct. That's correct. And it was really interesting, Roddy, because I started developing these cat designs when I started my own company in '76. And I went back to Scotland, I think '77, '78. And I went to the Scottish Development Agency. And there was an American lady by the name of Sylvia Price from Texas. And I said, look, I've got a pal of mine. He's in a wee shipyard down at Bowling, near the end of the Fourth Clyde Canal. It was part of Scott's shipyard. And I said, I'm happy to give you my designs of these roll-on, roll-off passenger catamarans for nothing. I'll license all these designs, and it just as long as you keep that shipyard open, because he was a pal of mine. I went to school with him, anyway, 2 or 3 weeks later, she said, "Mr. Ballantyne, we've checked this out. There is no future for these types of ferries anywhere in the world." I said, "Oh, okay, thank you." And the yard closed up there, and John Harden, my mate, went off to Canada and was working in a shipyard in Canada. Like a lot of the Scots ended up everywhere except for Scotland.
Yeah, that's a wee discussion we were having before we come on here. That one of our biggest exports is not whiskey and gin; it's our people. It's our best, the biggest resource, and we've made the world greater. But it's fair to say, without embarrassing you or any way, Stuart, you've gone on to be one of the world's leading designers of car ferries, catamaran type ferries, and we'll go into that for shortly. And that would be a fair assumption.
Yeah, I think it's a nice compliment, but I don't take it as an ego thing, because when people say, "Well, are you that clever?" I said, "No, I'm just lazy, and I figured out the easy way to do it." Because I don't think it's really all that clever, because when I sit and explain this, which I will be in Scotland in May the 12th, I'm doing a presentation at Strathclyde University on May the 12th on the unsinkable ferries with Professor Dracos Vasilis, because we've developed the unsinkable ferries, and we've been working for the last 4.5 years. This is a breakthrough for the world industry, and it is a Scottish-based, Scottish-designed, Scottish innovation. So we're actually doing the launch of that on May the 12th.
Once this is over, I'd like to speak to you about that, because there's something that might tie in with that. So I just want to be clear for our viewers. The ferries that you build, the South Sea, everyone's, the seas around Scotland are rough. The seas around the world are rough. Would it be fair to say the seas in the South Seas, or the China Sea, wherever you're building ships, are just as rough as the ships around the seas around Scotland? Would that be a fair?
It's a fair assessment. The first roll-on, roll-off passenger catamaran was a tiny wee thing, 35 meters, called the Philanderer 3, and we put it in across. We designed it in 1982. This is 40 years ago, for goodness sake. And we found by the time we built it, it started in '84 between the South Australian mainland and Kangaroo Island. And it's a place called the Backstairs Passage, because it's an a-hole of a place, right? It's just strong tides against strong winds, and up to 4.5 meter high seas. And this very small vessel, the 35 meter Philanderer 3, went in there, and in the first year alone, it made 2.5 million profit. The second year was 4 million profit, and it then became the cornerstone of a group called the Sea Link Group. And if you Google the Sea Link Group at the moment, they have 135 ships. mainly in Australia, but they're involved in bus companies and everything else. It's a huge company now, but the cornerstone was a small, successful ferry company to Kangaroo Island.
And you designed those ships.
Yes.
And so, moving on, you linking all those things together. You love the sea. You're building on ferries, world-leading ferries, and this catamaran design you come up with. They run. They're less expensive to run than, from the point of view of the viewers, of conventional ferries, roll-on, roll-off ferries. They're much cheaper to run. Am I right?
That's correct. That's
Yeah.
correct. We designed we in 1989 we went broke because there was high interest rates at the time. It was the same in the UK, 18% interest rates, and our design company went broke, and we were just starting into shipbuilding, and we ended up buying, on vendors' terms, a small ferry company. And I thought, oh, here's a go. So we bought a little monohull. We designed a little monohull of 35 meters long, and we built it. It was what we call our SLV designs, and we got 26 cars on it. The year after, I did the first of the RoPax CAT designs, and of course, we got 35 cars on the same length vessel with much higher speed. So that was in 1991. So since then, we've developed, we've done tank testing and everything else, and we've gone ahead because it actually beats anything around the place.
So it would be fair also to say, and I'm sorry to be so elongated here, but I want to set the stage before we move on to the main menu, shall we say. You just can't build ships, particularly passenger and car ferries, that don't pass stringent government regulations. And I would suggest that the regulations in Australia are as strong as anywhere else in the world. Would that
Oh,
again
yes,
be a fair assessment?
that's correct. That's correct. We've got this. We've all got the same rules.
Yeah, yeah. So, pulling this all together, you designed catamaran ferries, which are unique. They are cheaper to build, they're cheaper to run, they're better for the environment, they are as safe as anything, they can work in rough seas.
Yes.
And being a good patriotic Scot, you see the trouble that's going on in the Ferguson Marine Yard with these two ferries that the Scottish Government have, and you offered to help. You
Yes.
made yourself available. Would you like to tell us what you actually did to try and save us from this fiasco?
Well, when Jim McCall bought the yard, I thought it was great. Well, just before that, there was 2008. The SNP actually asked me to come to Scotland and give my opinion on Scottish shipbuilding using Nig Bay and Kishon. Nig Bay was at the time was an offshore oil rig building place up near Inverness, and Kishon was on the west coast. So in 2008, they paid me first class to come across there and give my opinion. And I thought, well, why are they asking my opinion? They said, because you're not involved with Scottish politics. Come across and do this. And I was so happy that someone was willing to listen. So I did a presentation called See Scotland. And I came across, I looked at Kishon, I looked at Nig Bay. I said, listen, you guys, you have 10 parts of a 10-part jigsaw. There is no use asking me about what should we do, because you've got the biggest customer in Europe. You have engineering faculties. You've got marine engineering. You've got hydroelectricity. You've got every part of this jigsaw, and you're asking me what should we do? I said, this is a piece of cake. This is what you got to do. I said, but with CalMac, because at that stage we owned and operated our own ferry companies. We now own and operate our own ports. And I said, well, what you have to do is you have to sack the board of CalMac and get people in there that actually know what they're doing. Because if you run a board in anything, you have to have people around the table that actually are skilled to know what they're doing. You know, you have a legal person, a commercial person, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
And of course, anyway, so I get down to Holyrood, full of enthusiasm and excitement. You know, here's Scotland finally going to move. And I went in there, and of course the bureaucrats who escorted us in there, and there was Alf Baird and Roy Peterson and myself, my wife Stephanie, and there was a lady bureaucrat there called Judith Ainsley, who introduced us to Stuart Stevenson and a couple of other ministers. And I said, listen, guys, now when I consult for, it doesn't matter whether it's the government of Samoa or the government of anywhere else, there's two basic rules. One is that if you want me to come to a preconceived conclusion, I'm not your man. Number two, you may not like what I tell you, but I'll always tell you the truth. Okay, is that a deal? Yes, that's a deal. So I present this PowerPoint presentation, and halfway through it says, on slide number 21, sack the board of CalMac and replace all the board. And of course, immediately the senior bureaucrat, this Judith Ainsley, this red-headed woman, gets into gyrations and ministers don't listen to what Mr. Ballantyne's telling you, because I said, no. I said, I'm only telling you the truth. You know, I said, I deal with different companies, with different governments, different colored people, different religion people. I tell them all the same thing, just stick with the truth, you know. And no, don't listen to Mr. Ballantyne. We're undergoing studies here. I said, that's the standard bureaucratic answer globally for not making a decision. We're undergoing a study. We're undergoing a review. This is standard bureaucratic parlance. It's just nonsense. And anyway, so they gave me the flick, and I didn't hear any more from them. And of course, then comes along Jim McCall. He buys the shipyard, and he sends, to his credit, he sent two people out to see me. One was Keith Mitchell, the director, and the second was a guy called Liam Campbell, who was a production guy. And I took them over one of our local catamarans here, walked them through the structure. We spent 3 or 4 days in my office going through all of the design drawings, the costings. And they said, listen, this is dead easy to build in Ferguson's. This is dead easy, and at the same price as what you guys can do in Australia, because our labor price is very similar, you know, allowing for the exchange rates, etc. This is a piece of cake. So they went back very happy. And at the same time, CalMac went to Jim McCall and said, look, we've got these two big vessels, £100 million a piece, and you know, which is 801, 802 now, Glen Sannox. And I went across to Scotland at the time, and I sat with Jim and I said, listen, Jim, with a new crew, you know, new staff, a shed that isn't as good as should be, my recommendation is don't do this, because these designs are orphans. And when you're trying to get a new building crew to build something strange, it's very difficult, and you will never make money. And the vessel is not resaleable, it's not redeployable. You're better sticking to what your guys have come out to Australia and have seen, and just stick to standard, good, modern designs. But Jim was, and I really like this guy. I think politically he was, you know, we have to do this for Scotland. We have to get a tick on the box. And Jim McCall, unfortunately, accepted those contracts and went ahead with them. But of course, as you know, the rest of the story ended up in tragedy.
Okay, but you foresaw this, and once again, just as you were talking about when you went to the Scottish Development Agency, they didn't listen to you. When you went to see the civil servants, they didn't listen to you. And here was Jim McCall, one of our most successful, brilliant entrepreneurs Scotland's ever seen. He doesn't have a shipping background, but anyway, so it went wrong. But even after it had gone wrong, you stepped in and tried to help.
Yes, and we've taken this all the time, and you know, and my lovely wife, she said, look, you keep going back like a pilgrimage. The Scotland said, look, guys, and I've sold these designs to all over the world, and when people do their assessment economically, or operationally they say, hey, these are a good design, let's go for this.
Mhm.
And I go back to Scotland, my native Scotland, and they say, no, we don't like these because these will never work, you know.
Don't get
And
ideas
I'm
above
saying,
your station.
that's about right, Roddy. It was just about right. Yeah, how dare you step out of your station? You know,
Yeah.
you've been in the heat too long. The sun's melted your heat.
Is that, but you tried to bail them out again, and you
Yes,
made a fantastic offer, didn't you, about leasing ships to them?
yes. Now we said, look, even these latest ones, you know, with two of 450 passengers and 100 cars for 105 million pounds. I said, listen, we could do that standing on our heads, but instead of building in Turkey, I said we would build the hulls somewhere uh, without one of our licensed builders, just the hulls, and we would bring it to Port Glasgow, and we would fit out the rest within the same budget. But we would use Scottish tradesmen, you know,
Mhm.
with the plumbing, the carpenters, the electricians, the communications guys, so that we get training and skills training.
Mhm.
Because I'm a great believer in that, you know.
Yep, and reviving the Clyde, which is,
Absolutely,
um,
absolutely.
but again, it fell on deaf ears,
Yes.
and you could have done, and still could, save. So what did you do? You then wrote to the finance minister to say, look, don't do this folly.
Yeah, that's right. That was a year ago to Kate Forbes, but I mean, I think that they're protected by so many layers of bureaucrats that they don't bother to write back to people like me.
Yep.
I'm just look, and you know, I'm like you, Roddy and Peter. Um, you know, you look back at Scotland and say, well, look, I'd love to help the place. And in a case like mine, I can help them. And certainly where there's thousands, I mean, tens of thousands of work opportunities there if they did it right. And one of the interesting things, Rod, is that this is 40 years later. We did the first roll-on, roll-off passenger one we did to Kangaroo Island in South Australia in 1984. We designed it in 82. This is 40 years ago.
Mhm.
And what we did with that island when the vessel went in there in 84, it reopened the island to tourism. It reopened the abattoirs. It took the government, they had a big government 80-meter monohull with 29 crew at, with a 10 million a year subsidy. And they got rid of that. And this small catamaran ferry opened up the island, opened up the job opportunities. The kids didn't go to the main city of Adelaide anymore. They stayed on the island, and the island grew. And this was
Mhm.
a classic case. This is 40 years ago.
Mhm.
And
So
what we're saying is, listen, if you do this in Scotland, you know, we think that some of the services, and we've been across there almost every year, except for the last couple of years of COVID.
mhm.
And I just despair to see some of these island routes with 3.5 miles of cars queued up, waiting to try and get on a ferry,
Yeah.
because the people who put in the ferries just haven't catered or designed it for peak loads.
Yeah, and it's not
So
cheap either. It's not
no,
cheap.
no,
And so, am I right in saying, if I've read it, all the things together, so for the price of the two ships that are lying doing goodness knows what in Port Glasgow and these two new ones in Turkey, you could have
yes,
replaced the entire fleet of Caledonian McBrain on a
absolutely,
leasing deal, and given
yes,
us
yes,
ships that are faster, as safe as anything,
yes.
more green, less
Yeah.
expensive to run, more profitable for the ship. Which begs the question: why, why, why wouldn't anyone grab that? What are you and I missing, Stuart? Tell me.
Uh, well, it's a bit like when you try and tell somebody their baby's ugly, you know.
Well, I try not to do that. Actually.
No, that was funny because um, when you say, well, look, you know, and there's the way you do design, ship design, I can tell you, we did a clean sheet approach to design. We said, okay, what is it you're trying to do? Now, the CalMac model, and apart from nostalgia, I love how they do it, because they'll take the last general arrangement drawing and they'll say, okay, Callum, what do you think, Donald? Oh, I think this next one will rake the funnel a wee bit, and we'll, maybe put another passenger deck here. At the moment, it's another crew deck, because the RMT need a crew cabin each with full facilities, and 29 of those. Even if they don't go home at night, they're in their home port, and they live 100 meters up the road, but they don't go home. We don't do that in day ferries anywhere else in the world. Yes, of course, if it's an overnight 24 hours, but of course CalMac is not that. And so RMT's got a bit of a tight grip on them at the moment, which is a bit of a shame. And you don't have any ministers strong enough or with spine enough to say, well, okay, this is just nonsense. We can't afford this nonsense anymore.
And ongoing, if the government come back to you, a Scottish government come back to you, you would be willing to give your world-leading expertise, advice and designs to help your native country. Am I right?
Absolutely. Even I've just gone back to CalMac themselves and said, look, for 105 million pounds sterling, that we would build 2 vessels of 450 passengers, 100 cars, but we would build them, the hulls overseas, and all the balance of the fit out in Port Glasgow. But we had suggested, the problem was that with Ferguson's, the sheds they'd built were actually quite skinny. They were all built for monohulls. And why Inchgreen is so important to me anyway, is a clean sheet approach. I said, well, Inchgreen's sitting along the road there, so you could use the same labor, and just put some gantry cranes over that, and some retractable roof arrangements. Roddy, when I left, when the family left Scotland in the early 60s, the reason why the old man was getting concerned, because they were trying to build ships in Scotland up on a slipway in the open, in the snow, the hail, the rain.
The summer weather, you mean?
Yeah, that's right. And where already the Japanese, the Koreans were building undercover in a dock, with temperature control and everything else. And, I don't know how they did the communications those days, but the old man knew that this shipyard was going to go down the gurgle. Denny's, with an impressive 120-year track record, this place is going to go down the gurgle, as with all the other Scottish shipyards. And at the time, nobody was putting any money back into Scotland, and especially that Ted Heath, which, I was just getting involved with observing politics at the time in the early 70s, when Ted Heath closed all of the Upper Clyde shipyards, which I thought was a disgrace. And thousands of guys out of work. And immediately, and in fact, I put a YouTube out not long ago with saying you should not do this, because I was in Scotland in the early 70s when Heath closed the Upper Clyde shipyards, and thousands of guys are out of work. And immediately I saw, if I hadn't been there, I wouldn't have believed it, but immediately I saw domestic violence, home invasions, and suicides. And I said, now that's why you don't do lockdowns, And I was protesting against the Australian government doing lockdowns, and the New Zealand government. Anyone that would listen, don't do this, because it creates more problems than COVID problems,
The other thing, moving on to this, when your designs were presented, there was some mistakes, shall we say, made about capacity, about tonnage, about all those sort of things, which were either malicious, e.g. corruption, or the wrong people are presenting these ships. Am I
right? Yes, there was a fictitious catamaran design presented by CalMac saying, well, we viewed our latest monohull with the projected CalMac catamaran, and I don't know where they got that catamaran figures, because it was sent through to me and said, well, does this represent reality? And when I looked at it and when my office went through, this was just a piece of nonsense. Somebody fabricated this to make us look bad, or to make catamarans look bad.
Yeah.
And I don't know who was the author of that and why they would do it.
Yeah. So it's either stupidity or corruption.
That's one or the other, yes.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I know which one I would put my money on.
yes,
Just as
but I don't think they're all corrupt. I think there's
no.
I think you know, I've met a lot of people inside CalMac, and some of them are good, but the fact is that you know, whoever's leading the choir has to be bringing everyone else. So listen, we have to make a good ferry company great.
Yeah. Well,
At the moment, it's a not so good ferry company, and they're pulling it down.
Yeah, they're also thinking about selling it. So, you know, to have it failing is the great way to take something that's in the public ownership, is to make it really bad. Makes it justifies the selling of it. As an old lefty myself, I'm opposed to all that sort of stuff of selling off public assets. But
are you a lefty?
I'm a lefty. Same when I play football. I used to play football when I play golf, all lefty. But the other thing you won't be surprised to hear, the Ferry Oversight Group has been disbanded by the Scottish government. So, in typical British fashion, no one's going to be held to account for this fiasco. Does that surprise you?
It doesn't surprise me, because when bureaucrats, I mean, I've dealt with a lot of different governments, Roddy, around the world, and I can tell you, I don't care if they're what color they are, what religion they are, but the fact is that bureaucrats seem to protect themselves, and the last thing they need to do is expose their jobs by making a decision. So what they prefer to do is say, well, if we don't make a decision and we just deny everything, everything will be all right in the night.
Yeah.
But the fact is that you need, in leadership, you need somebody with spine and say, this is good for the country.
Yeah.
This
Unfortunately, we don't have one of them. Unfortunately, we don't have one of them. Maybe one day soon. You never know. Stuart, can I thank you so much for coming in at such short notice and helping us and giving us your expertise and your the information was fantastic. And I'm sure the people out there now will be even more enraged at the nonsense that's going on. One of our finest, one of the things we're known best for, building ships. The greatest ships that sailed some of the seas were all Scots. The old story about if you shouted down into an engine room, "Hey, Jock," you get someone speaking back to you.
Absolutely, and all the ships I sail with are Scots engineers, and it was a pride. It was a very proud heritage, and that's why I get frustrated in my constant rejections from CalMac. I thought, I'm just trying to help these people. Anyway,
help your nation. That's what patriots do, Stuart. That's what patriots do. We're in it for the long haul. But Stuart, for the time, I hope you'll come back soon and have another chat with us. Thank you.
I shall be in Scotland in Strathclyde University on the 12th of May,
where you become a doctor, an honorary doctorship, and well-deserved.
An honorary doctorship, yes. But we're presenting. This is a groundbreaking development. This is the unsinkable ferry design. We've been working with Strathclyde for the last 5 years on a solution which makes a vessel totally unsinkable, and we've finally got it through. So we were supposed to do it last year, because of COVID we couldn't do it, but we're doing it in Strathclyde. So I'll get you along. I'll send you an invite, Roddy. You're gonna love it.
Well, I can say the other thing that's famous about Scotland and Glasgow in particular is our dry crew humour and wit. And I would just say that they told us the Titanic was unsinkable. Do you remember?
Yeah. Well, that was Irish built.
Well, they said it. Well, there's a great T-shirt in Ireland which said it was all right when it left here. So
Yeah. Oh, no, that's excellent. No, but the fact this is, this is when you see this presentation, it's a 2-hour presentation on May the 12th at Strathclyde University.
Well, I
And
will
there's
be in
going to be
Scotland.
all sorts of people there from the Navy, from government, from CalMac. We've invited CalMac and saying, well, okay, we've been working on this. Not only we've got the best designs in the world, but now they're unsinkable. And this is, we're declaring that this is a Scottish innovation, Scottish engineering, and we should be not dismissing this,
No, we
our
shouldn't.
capabilities. We should be encouraging it.
Yeah. Well, there are people in the wings, trust me, Stuart, who are trying to
I hope so.
pull
I
it
hope
together.
so. Roddy, thank you very much.
Thank you, Stuart.
Cheers.